Hey everyone, Cynics here, and I'm going to be doing another video about rendering metallic surfaces. So we started with a problem a few videos ago, and that was that I wasn't feeling that comfortable with rendering metallic surfaces. They weren't looking that great. So I did a photo ref study, and now I'm going to try to take the logic that I learned from doing that photo ref study and see if I can apply it to a non-ref speed painting. So that's the goal here, and you can see I prepared a quick little thumbnail of a nice little mech design. Pretty basic in terms of its positioning. It's just facing the camera. There's no real foreshortening or perspective stuff going on. I just want to keep it nice and simple so I could focus on the textures. So I'm just kind of getting it prepared right here, fixing the slight symmetrical anomalies that occur when you're just drawing a small thumbnail. But here's the first thing I'm doing. I'm drawing a little sphere off to the side. I'm going to pretend this is my metallic sphere, and it's going to sum up what the world is that's being reflected by my metallic surfaces in this digital painting. So this first one I'm doing is kind of based on a more traditional outdoor setting. Right now, if I look at that metallic ball, it looks like it's reflecting maybe an Old West town. Well, now I added a little bit of green texture. So now it looks like it's reflecting, say, a baseball stadium. So that's kind of the way we were doing armor in the last photo ref video, with the earthly tones being reflected from the bottom and the sky tones being reflected from the top. And that's kind of a very useful way of doing metal anytime you're like in an outside environment. But I don't want to just copy that, so I'm going to try to make another ball here, and I'm going to try to build an environment in my head, and I'm going to render it onto the sphere. So in my mind, I was thinking that this is like a robot. So maybe it could be in a warehouse type setting, like a warehouse factory type setting. So I'm kind of drawing like a gray, maybe concrete floor. And then I'm going to have a ceiling, and that's going to be, dark. But I'm going to put rows of lights on them. And I'm just kind of using basic logic on how a sphere reflects the world around it to kind of give a slight curve to all the horizons and the rows of lights and things like that. And I'm just trying to set up all my colors that I'll be using when I actually go to start rendering my mech here. So I think it's looking okay right now. If I squint my eyes, it kind of looks like it's reflecting some kind of open warehouse setting. And I tried to throw in like a couple columns here and there and things like that just to give it a little more personality. So I think I'm ready to hop onto my actual mech here. And it always looks a bit weird right when you're starting out with these metallic surfaces. You can see though, I'm just hopping right into the main structure because I have this nice round core to my mech, this torso part, and it's nice and round, so I should be able to basically copy what I did in that little metal ball. Except, I'll have to make very slight changes because obviously this isn't quite spherical. It's a little different. But for the most part, I should be at least able to use all the colors I picked and stuff like that. So here you can see there's a slight curve to all these rows of lights, and I'm just kind of setting up the ceiling. And it looks like the back walls, or I should say the surrounding walls, are kind of like darkest value. And I think that's a good thing to have anytime you're doing like metallic surfaces, is to have your horizon line or your, middle line be kind of nice and dark with one color up top, like the ceiling color or the sky color, and then a different color on the bottom for the ground or the earth tones. So here you can see how I'm bending those slight lines to give the illusion that it's reflecting columns and there's lights. And I'm using a little bit of the glow brush just to bring those lights just a little more life into them. But here you can see I also went through and I decided that it would be a good idea to reflect some of the other stuff around the mech. So you can see there's a slight bit of black brush around the top corners. It kind of makes it look like this thing has eyeballs. Maybe it's like a mouser or something at this point. But it kind of looks like that, and that's just because it's reflecting the shadow from those little, I'm going to call them little radar things that it has on its shoulders. So those are like little radar dishes on the shoulders, or I could just call them the shoulder pads or something like that. But it's reflecting that, and I'm just kind of trying to establish different things with the reflections. So you can see I kind of did a nice strong highlight along the top, and I'm just kind of trying to band. I'm always trying to follow the shape of the object with my brush strokes, and that's kind of important. And it will definitely become more important once I start getting into the more awkward and strange shapes of the mech. You heard me mention the word band or banding, and I'll just give a quick example of what I was talking about. If you were to say, look at a shiny metal pipe, and just kind of look at what it's reflecting, it has to reflect both the world directly above it and the world directly below it, all to you. So that's like 180 degrees of information. And all that information gets compressed into this tiny little amount of space. So the end result is that it just looks like a bunch of bands of light and color lengthwise going across the pipe. So you can imagine how the direction of your brushstrokes is really going to make that effect a lot easier on you. Anyway, I had a lot of fun doing this piece, and up till now, I would say there was a distinct lack of any sort of shiny metal industrial design stuff in my portfolio. So it's great to kind of explore this stuff more, and it's actually a lot of fun. I think I'll come back to doing shiny metal textures a lot more often. In fact, the whole process of doing this was less like I was trying to render a mech or something, and more like I was just trying to render an environment and show an environment without actually having a background or environment. So it's kind of this fun mental project, and it just makes for an interesting rendering test. Now, if you want to kind of start messing around with this stuff, let me go back to that little metal sphere there on the side. A fun study exercise to do is to take a photograph off your computer, preferably something with some environmental stuff, and try to render a shiny metal reflective ball somewhere into the photograph. It's a pretty good exercise to help you work on your rendering skills, and it's also kind of fun. You can go online when you're done and show your balls to all your artsy friends. But anyway, let's get back to the painting. So at this point you can see that I've moved away from the torso and I'm starting to try to render out some of the more awkward and strange parts of the mech, such as the legs, or the upper legs rather, which gave me a lot of trouble. In fact, I would say everything other than the torso gave me trouble because I was really just kind of playing it by eye and trying to figure out which direction the lines of, color and reflection should be going. And I'm not even sure if it's, completely accurate or not. But, once again, this is kind of a first attempt, and I'm just going to keep doing things like this until I get better and better at them. Because that's the way you learn, just by continually doing something, failing here or there, and just kind of trying to keep with it, and eventually, hopefully, you pick up enough knowledge from all of your experiences that you can eventually just, crank stuff out without thinking too much about it. So these little shoulder pad radar things, I kind of banded the colors and the strokes in a different direction to try to follow them, and I wasn't actually sure what to do with those for a while. I think that's why I did the leg first, hoping it would kind of make me logically figure out which way the reflection should be going in those shoulder pads, and I think I did it right. I'm actually not 100% sure, and it's kind of interesting to be putting up all these videos because I don't want you guys to think that I'm some teacher trying to teach you guys things. I'm just a student that's learning, but I've decided to share my own learning process with you guys and kind of talk about my stream of conscious and what's going on in my head anytime I'm doing a painting. So I guess that's kind of educational in its own way, but it's not like I'm coming at you with this idea that I already know how everything works and stuff like that. I'm just figuring stuff out, and hopefully the figuring of stuff out is kind of what helps people learn the most. So I think those legs and those shoulder pads are, somewhat describing the form. They might not be. I don't agree with all those little dots, like in hindsight. Well, I guess I got rid of a lot of them on like the upper thighs and stuff like that, because I don't think they would be reflecting that much of the ceiling. It's kind of hard to say. I'm trying to logically piece together where every, direction of light is being reflected back toward the viewer and, how everything's bouncing off. And it just becomes this complicated, mathematical, logical mess. But that's kind of fun. I love that stuff. I love these like weird, logical, complicated kind of puzzles that you have to piece together with your rendering. So I think, definitely this type of stuff is right up my alley, and maybe it is for you, but maybe it isn't. But regardless, it's a fun experiment, and definitely will be a good thing to probably fill out your portfolio, or certainly my portfolio. um, but I decided that not everything on this mech should be shiny metal or reflective stuff. So I decided that like the shoulder areas, I do something less reflective, just basic metal, dull metal, the type of stuff you've seen in every single mech I've ever done in my gallery. And I kind of was trying to decide on the legs, the lower part of the legs. You can see on the one on the left, I was trying to think about how it would look if it was shiny. And then on the one on the right, I was like, well, let's see how it would look if it wasn't shiny. And I think overall, I like the non-shiny one. So that's the one I went with. It just kind of breaks up that constant, feeling of the same materials everywhere, which is definitely something I hate to have. I like there to be some contrast in materials. I don't want everything to feel like it's made of the same stuff, just, one giant block of shiny metal or one giant piece of, rusty metal. And sadly, that's how a lot of my pieces have been, one giant piece of rusty metal. But I'm trying to move on. I'm trying to improve my skills and get to the next level, just like everyone else is. I'm certainly far from where I want to be, as I'm sure most people are, and that's good. You should never be satisfied with where you're at. That's not really an artisty thing to be satisfied with what you're doing. Always be striving to improve yourself in some way. So once again, these like giant hand things also completely intimidating because I had no idea how I would be reflecting the environment off these. I kind of had some idea in that the one part of them that's facing upward would reflect, basically just the ceiling, and then I'd have the horizon somewhere in that area where it turns. You can see the horizon's kind of going in the area where it turns from being upward to downward, and then the ground in there. And I think that's maybe okay. I don't know. It turned out looking all right. At least it looks reflective, which is something. I don't know if it's completely accurate, but at least it's reflective. And that's the key thing, possibly. I don't know if that's the key thing or not, but it'll work out in the end. So you can see I'm kind of just copying stuff from the other places, much like I do in any, piece I do. Is I copy stuff once I've established enough, different tones here and there. Then I stop having to go to the color wheel, and I can just be copying and color picking all my colors from other places on my painting, which is it's a nice place to get to because it kind of speeds up the whole process a bunch when you're not like feeling like you're having to select colors and get your colors right. So more reflections, more bands of color and light, especially the lighting, kind of trying to focus on having dark bands next to light bands and things like that. And you could also see once in a while I'm flipping off and on this layer that I'm doing all my rendering on. I decided to do it on a layer above the thumbnail, and the reason for that is just because I didn't want to lose the feel of the thumbnail, because I like the thumbnail. It had good personality, and I'm glad I did it this way because there's a lot of times where I flipped off this rendering layer and I was like, wow, I completely lost all the things that I loved so much about the thumbnail, just the shapes and like the contours and certain things about the way it moves and the life it has. Because it's definitely important to remember. I've mentioned it before, but when you do something fast, that's when it has the most energy, that's when it has the most life to it. And when you do things slowly, such as rendering out, doing these slow renders of metal and surfaces and stuff, you can lose so much energy. You lose all of that kind of awesome style that you had in your thumbnail. So it's important to always be making sure that you're not losing any of that. So I was looking at my shoulder areas, and I decided that they were a bit too static with all that, brown rusty metal texture. So I thought I'd add like a cylinder of reflective metal in there, and I think that breaks it up nicely. It's just, once again, that's kind of the process of being, doing design stuff, is looking at each section and deciding if it has the right amount of contrast, design contrast, that is. Is it too boring? Is it going just one way here? Does it like really kind of feel cohesive all the way from top to bottom? Like there's the right mix of both different textures and things like that. Anyway, it looks like we're getting closer and closer to being done with this piece. I drew some like kind of, I'm not sure if the lights that I drew on the hand parts are accurate. I could have done like spots of lights all across like the kind of mid sections and whatnot, but I just did them in that turning point. I just decided to do my little spots of light there. But maybe you guys might have ideas on, where my logic might have been thrown off here and there. Maybe if my reflections aren't quite accurate or they don't describe the environment the same way all throughout, that can be jarring to the eye. So hopefully it's not, though. Here you can see I got rid of my little metal balls on the side since I don't need them anymore. It's time to start wrapping things up and do my finishing touches. So I'm using a little bit of glow brush, bringing in a little bit of reflected shadows on the arms, on the wrist areas. And I think the last thing I'm going to do, after I do a little bit more glow brush, is I'm just going to go in and experiment with adding some crazy like color designs. Because right now I have this nice shiny Mech. It looks very pristine. It looks very basic and simple. But I like to have some fun with my stuff. So I'm going to try to bring in some bright red paint on top of things. I tried like a little crown looking thing. That didn't quite work. I'm going to try some different stuff here, kind of doing some cutouts in the metal. I wind up not keeping those ones, spoilers. But here we go. I'm kind of experimenting. I'm liking this red paint. It just makes the metal pop that much more and kind of brings everything to life. So I'm picking my accent points very carefully. I did like a crazy spiral on the hand, which it took me a while to recreate the way I wanted it on the other hand. But you can see like just a little touches here and there, and knowing where you want to put those touches and knowing not to go too overboard. Those things were obviously a little bit too overboard, so I took them out. And I think this is about the right mix of, painted accents. I'll probably add one more around the top area just to kind of sum it all up. The main core torso area doesn't really have much going on, so I'll just add one right up there. But you can also see how I added the red reflections in some of the areas just to kind of really make everything cohesive. So I think that's it, and hopefully this was as fun to watch as it was to do, because once again, I love doing mechs and stuff like that. And in case you're curious, the next design lab is probably going to be something mechanical, something industrial design like. So you'll have to look for that shortly, and it will be viewer participation. But anyway, next video will be critique time, and I'm looking forward to that. So take care and have fun.